The most dangerous person in your life right now is probably smiling at you. Not the one who argued with you last week. Not the one you already know doesn't like you. Those people are almost irrelevant. Your brain has already filed them under threat and built a perimeter. The person worth paying attention to is the one who feels safe, the one you'd call if something went wrong, the one whose name, if I said it out loud right now, you'd probably feel a small, involuntary sense of warmth toward. Machiavelli understood something that almost no one wants to admit. An enemy you can see is not your most dangerous enemy. In The Prince, he wrote that a ruler who survives is one who knows how to be both the lion and the fox. The lion fights what it can see. The fox avoids the trap it cannot. Most people spend their entire lives developing lion skills, learning to confront, learning to argue, learning to defend themselves from direct attack, and they walk straight into traps. Here is what makes a covert adversary so effective. They don't need you to feel threatened. They need you to feel supported, because the moment you feel supported, you stop watching. You open up. You share things. You interpret ambiguous signals as kindness instead of what they actually are. You've probably already experienced a version of this. You shared good news with someone, and something felt slightly off in their response. Not wrong enough to name. Just a half degree of friction you couldn't locate. You told yourself you were overthinking it. Maybe you were. Or maybe you were reading something real, and talked yourself out of trusting it. By the time we reach the 7th behavior in this video, you will have a name for that feeling. Comment, "I trust actions more than words," if someone specific just crossed your mind. Let's start where most people would least expect to start, with a compliment. Someone you know just found out you got promoted, or you closed a deal, or you finished something you'd been working on for a long time. They hear the news and they say, immediately, "That's amazing. I'm so happy for you." And they mean it. At least, it sounds like they mean it. The words are correct. The timing is correct. Then, within 60 seconds, the conversation is about them. Not aggressively, not obviously. Just, "That's amazing. I'm so happy for you. Oh, that actually reminds me. I've been dealing with this thing at work." And you're nodding along, and you've already moved on. And somewhere in the back of your mind the moment passed so fast you barely registered it happened. That is not a compliment. That is a transaction. The compliment is the minimum social payment required to change the subject back to themselves without appearing rude. Machiavelli wrote in the Discourses that a person who wishes to maintain relative advantage will never allow another to shine fully in their presence without inserting a qualifier. The qualifier doesn't have to be aggressive. It just has to be fast enough that the moment doesn't settle. There's a more refined version of this, and it's worth knowing exactly what it sounds like. "You did really well, especially considering you didn't have much background in this area." Read that sentence again. The first half is a compliment. The second half is a reframe. What they've just done in one sentence is acknowledge your success and simultaneously establish a ceiling on what that success means. You did well given your limitations. That is not encouragement. That is ego protection. Theirs, not yours. The version most people miss is even quieter than that. A smile that doesn't reach the eyes is something researchers call the absence of the Duchenne marker, the slight crinkling around the eyes that happens automatically with genuine positive emotion. You can't fake it reliably, and you can't unsee it once you know what you're looking for. Someone can say all the right words with their mouth while their eyes are doing something else entirely. Here is the distinction that almost no one draws, and it matters. Praise and acknowledgement are not the same behavior. Praise is performative. It completes a social obligation. Acknowledgement is substantive. It requires the other person to actually engage with what you did. The person who is genuinely glad you succeeded will ask a follow-up question. They want to understand what it took. They're curious about the next step. The person running performative applause will say the right words and redirect. You can test this. The next time you share good news, say it and then stop. Don't elaborate. Don't fill the silence. Just watch what they do with it. Someone who is actually in your corner will lean in. Someone who needed to check the box will change the subject. But applause, even when it's empty, is still at least facing you. The next behavior doesn't face you at all. It watches you. There is a particular kind of person who remembers everything you've ever told them, the name of the colleague who undermined you 2 years ago. The thing your father said that still bothers you. The financial stress you mentioned once, casually, almost in passing. They hold all of it. And when you notice how much they remember, it feels like care. It feels like the kind of attention that's rare. It makes you want to keep talking. That is exactly what it's designed to do. Markus Wolf ran East German foreign intelligence for 3 decades. He was arguably the most effective spy master of the Cold War. Before deploying any operation, before making any move, his organization built a complete psychological profile of the target. Not their public profile. Their private architecture, fears, failures, relationship conflicts, financial pressure, unresolved resentments. The operation came later. The mapping came first. Because you cannot move someone until you know where they're unstable. That structure did not stay inside intelligence agencies. There is a term in manipulation research called strategic self-disclosure. The person shares something personal with you first. A vulnerability, a past mistake. Something that sounds like trust. It triggers reciprocity. You feel the pull to match their openness. You share something back. What they shared was calculated. What you shared was real. And now they have it. Watch for the reaction testing pattern. Because it's easy to miss once you know what you're looking for. A small jab, framed as humor. A comment that lands just slightly wrong. A moment of pressure, light enough to be deniable. Specific enough to be intentional. They're not being careless. They're watching how you respond, what destabilizes you, what you're sensitive about, what they can return to later. Here is the thing that runs counter to what most people believe. The question is not whether someone asks a lot of questions. Curious, caring people ask a lot of questions. The question is what they ask about. Genuine interest asks about your aspirations, where you're going, what you're building, what excites you. The other kind circles back, repeatedly, to your fears, your failures, your conflicts, and the people who have let you down. Think about someone in your life right now. Think about whether the questions they ask leave you feeling seen or leave you feeling, somehow, slightly more exposed than you intended to be. If all the information flows in one direction, it's not a conversation, it's an intake. Now you have a picture of someone who applauds without meaning it and listens without caring. But neither of those behaviors will show you who they really are. The reveal comes when things go wrong for you. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that in times of adversity, when the state needs them, few are to be found. He was writing about mercenaries. Soldiers for hire who performed loyalty in peacetime, and disappeared the moment the fighting got real. He wasn't being cynical about human nature in the abstract. He was describing a specific behavioral pattern that repeats across every context, in every era, including yours. The convenience-based ally does not vanish dramatically. That would be too obvious, and these people are not obvious. What happens is quieter than that. Response times get longer. Availability becomes complicated. The energy shifts from engaged to managed. They're still there, technically. They still like your posts. They still respond eventually. But the texture of the relationship changes in a way that's hard to articulate and impossible to deny once you've felt it. Here is what it looks like at the behavioral level, specifically. When you were ascending, they reached out. They wanted to be near what you were building. When things became uncertain, the contact reversed. Suddenly, you were the one initiating, and when you did reach out, you got the particular response that is somehow worse than silence. Let me know if you need anything. Nobody needs to hear that sentence. It is a social gesture dressed as an offer. It places the burden on you, while allowing them to feel they showed up. The tell is in the timing, not the presence. Anyone can be around during good stretches. The variable that matters is who reaches out when there is nothing in it for them. No news to celebrate, no event to attend, no favor to exchange, just contact. For no reason, because they thought of you. That is the behavior of someone who is actually invested in you as a person, not in what your proximity provides them. Track this if you want to be precise about it. Over 3 months, note who initiates contact first, without an occasion. Not who responds most warmly when you reach out. Not who shows up to things. Who starts the conversation when there is no reason to. The list will be shorter than you expect, and it will be accurate. There is a version of this that is more painful to recognize, because it wears a more convincing mask. The convenience-based ally withdraws during your setbacks, but the next behavior shows up during your setbacks, reliably, with exactly the right expression on their face. The most disarming form of control does not sound like control. It sounds like someone who cares about you. I'm just saying this because I want to see you succeed. I don't want you to get hurt. Have you really thought about what happens if this doesn't work? Said slowly. Said with a kind of weighted pause that implies what comes next is difficult for them to say, but they care too much not to. Notice what that construction does. It pre-authorizes the content. It frames whatever follows as an act of love. So when the content itself is a reason not to move, not to try, not to risk, it arrives already wrapped in concern, and your defenses are down because the packaging felt like safety. Machiavelli understood that the most efficient way to neutralize someone is not to attack them. It is to make them stop themselves. An attack requires them to respond. An internal doubt requires nothing from the attacker at all. The person who plants the doubt can walk away clean while you sit with it for days. Pay attention to when the concern appears. That is the diagnostic. Someone who genuinely wants to help you succeed will engage after you've tried, when the risk is real and support is what you actually need. Weaponized concern appears before you begin. Its function is to interrupt the starting motion, not to prepare you for the journey. There is a frequency pattern here too. Everyone raises a concern once. That is normal. That is what people who care about you do. But if there is someone in your life who, every time you share something you're building, something you want, something you're reaching toward, reliably surfaces the risk, the downside, the reason to wait, that is not a pattern of concern. That is a policy. and policies have purposes. The passive-aggressive variation is worth knowing because it comes after you've ignored the concern and moved forward anyway. Of course you know best, said in a particular tone. Not quite sarcasm, not quite resignation, just enough edge to register, not enough to confront. What it communicates is, I warned you, and when this fails, I will have been right. It positions them for vindication before the outcome is even known. Here is the question that cuts through all of it. If you succeed at the thing they're concerned about, does that change their situation in any way? Does it expose a gap? Does it shift a comparison? Does it move something they've been quietly holding in place? The answer to that question tells you more than anything they've said. Machiavelli wrote that a wise ruler must know when to take counsel and when to recognize that the counsel being offered serves the counselor. He wasn't saying distrust advice. He was saying understand whose interests the advice protects before you let it reshape yours. Everything we've covered so far has happened in front of you. The next behavior operates somewhere you can't see. You start noticing it gradually. A conversation that goes slightly quiet when you walk in. A response that feels a few degrees cooler than it used to be. An invitation that didn't come, nothing you can point to. Nothing concrete enough to bring up without sounding paranoid. Just a slow, ambient shift in how the room feels when you're in it. That is not an accident. Machiavelli wrote in the Discourses that indirect accusation is among the most powerful political tools available, precisely because it cannot be defended against directly. You cannot refute something that was never said openly. You cannot confront a question. You cannot argue against a raised eyebrow or a strategically incomplete version of a story you weren't there to tell. The whispering campaign does not announce itself. It works through questions. Doesn't something feel a little off about how they handled that? Not a statement, a question. Questions require no accountability. They plant without signing their name. The person who hears the question does the rest of the work themselves, filling in the gaps, arriving at a conclusion that feels like their own. The other mechanism is selective omission. They tell your story, but they leave out the part that would make you look reasonable. They describe what you did without the context that explains why you did it. The story is technically accurate. The picture it creates is not. And because there are no lies to point to, there is no clear moment of betrayal to name. Watch for the digital version of this, because it is quieter and therefore easier to miss. A gradual absence of engagement. Posts you used to be tagged in, you're no longer tagged in. Group threads where your name stops appearing. An invitation list that quietly contracts. None of it is dramatic. All of it is deliberate. Social exclusion does not require confrontation. It only requires a series of small omissions, each one deniable on its own. Here is the clearest diagnostic. If your reputation is shifting in one specific social or professional circle, but nowhere else, there is almost certainly a single point of origin. A whispering campaign cannot operate across unconnected contexts simultaneously. It spreads through a network, and networks have centers. Narrow the geography of where things changed, and you narrow the source. The reason this behavior is so corrosive is not what it does to your reputation. It is what it does to your ability to trust your own perception. You start second-guessing rooms. You start wondering if you're imagining things. You become smaller, more careful, more apologetic in spaces where you used to move freely. And the person responsible never had to say a single thing directly. When you finally recognize what's happening and decide to stop accommodating it. When you pull back, create distance, establish some protection for yourself. That is when behavior 6 appears, and it will not look like what you expect. The moment you set a boundary with this kind of person, something shifts. Not loudly. They don't confront you. They don't argue. What happens is more like a temperature change, a subtle withdrawal of warmth, a new formality where there used to be ease, or the opposite. A sudden, unexpected burst of closeness, a reminder of good times, an overture that feels generous but arrives with suspicious timing, right after you said no to something. Both responses are the same thing. They are tests. They are checking whether the boundary is real or whether it's negotiable. Machiavelli was precise about this. He understood that what people resent is not the specific thing you withheld. What they resent is the loss of access. A boundary is not an emotional event to a person who has been operating instrumentally. It is a logistics problem. It removes something they were accounting on having, and they will work methodically to restore access, either by making the boundary feel unnecessary or by making you feel that enforcing it costs too much socially. The relabeling is the part that lands hardest, because it doesn't come from them directly. It filters through the people around you. Suddenly you're different. You've changed. You're not as warm as you used to be. You're too good for the group now. Notice what this framing does. It takes self-ownership and repackages it as betrayal. The act of having a limit becomes evidence of a character flaw. And because it comes from multiple directions, it can feel like consensus, like maybe they're right, like maybe you are the problem. This is not consensus. It is coordination. The escalation pattern, once you see it, is almost mechanical. There is a request. You decline. There is resentment, expressed indirectly. There is relabeling, distributed through the social environment. Then, after a period, there is a new version of the original request, reframed slightly, approached from a different angle. The ask did not go away. It changed its packaging. What any particular boundary triggers tells you exactly what was being extracted. If the friction appears specifically when you protect your time, they needed your labor. If it appears when you stop sharing personal information, they needed your data. If it appears when you pull back from a particular dynamic, they needed the dynamic itself, the position it gave them relative to you. Machiavelli did not write about friendship in any sentimental sense, but he wrote extensively about who can be trusted when things are genuinely difficult. His conclusion, returned to again and again, was that loyalty reveals itself under friction, not under good conditions. Under friction. The person who cannot tolerate your no is not someone you want present when the stakes are real. The next behavior is the one that was promised at the beginning of this video, and it is the one that disguises itself most convincingly as the opposite of what it is. You share bad news with someone. Something fell through. Something you worked hard on didn't land. Or something personal, something that cost you something to say out loud, and they respond immediately, not after a pause. Not with the slight delay of someone who needed a moment to absorb what you said. Immediately. The words are right. The tone is correct. I'm so sorry, that's awful, are you okay? But the energy underneath the words is running in the wrong direction. There is something almost alert in them. A quality of attention that wasn't there 5 minutes ago before you shared the news. You can't name it in the moment. You file it as support and move on. What you were actually reading was the ventral striatum doing its job. Neuroimaging research has traced what happens in the brain when someone with malicious envy witnesses a rival's failure. The reward circuit activates, the same cluster of dopamine-mediated response associated with food, money, physical pleasure. This is not a metaphor. The signal is functionally equivalent. Watching you fall produces, in a specific category of person, a genuine neurological reward. And that reward has to go somewhere. It leaks into the response, into the energy, into the quality of attention they bring to your bad news, even when the words are performing sympathy perfectly. Machiavelli wrote that a prince need not make himself enemies. He need only wait. Because people with enough unresolved envy will eventually get what they're waiting for through the simple passage of time and the inevitability of setbacks. They don't need to act, they just need to be present when it happens. Research published in Frontiers in Psychology found that the intensity of malicious envy predicts the intensity of the pleasure felt when the envied person fails. The stronger the envy that existed before, the stronger the reward when you stumble, which means the more you have succeeded around this person, the more they have wanted this moment, whether they are conscious of that or not. Here is the behavioral signature, and it is specific enough to watch for. When you share bad news with someone who is genuinely in your corner, their energy contracts. They slow down. There is a registering, a taking in of what you've said before they respond. The response, when it comes, tends to be simpler than you might expect, less elaborate. Because real sympathy doesn't perform, it just responds. The person running schadenfreude behind a sympathy mask responds faster. They engage more. They ask for details you didn't offer. There is a quality of heightened presence that reads, on the surface, as concern, but runs on a completely different fuel, counterintuitive as it sounds. The person who says the least when you fail, who gives you a flat, simple, "I'm really sorry to hear that," and doesn't push for more, is often the one who actually means it. Excessive, immediate, detail-seeking sympathy is sometimes a leak. The reward system is active, and the words are trying to contain it. There is something worth sitting with here that goes beyond tactics. The reason this behavior exists is not purely malice. Some of it is. But a lot of it is something more ordinary and more uncomfortable to look at directly. Your existence, your progress, your momentum reminds certain people of the distance between where they are and where they wanted to be by now. They don't necessarily wish you harm in any conscious, deliberate sense. They just experience your success as a kind of reproach. And when that reproach lifts, even briefly, something in them relaxes. Machiavelli was not sentimental about this. He did not suggest you should find it forgivable or unfindable. He suggested you should know who is in the room with you and calibrate accordingly. Not by becoming paranoid, by becoming accurate. The final behavior does not appear when you fail. It appears the moment you succeed. You share good news, something real, something that took time and effort and cost you something to build. And within hours, sometimes within minutes, the person you told shares something of their own. Not related to your news, not in response to it, just adjacent to it, in timing, close enough that the proximity is unmistakable once you see it. A new accomplishment, a milestone, a reminder of their own relevance, delivered at the exact moment yours was peaking. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that the person who cannot afford to let another's power go uncontested will not attack it directly. Direct attack elevates the target. What they will do instead is neutralize it, make it seem ordinary, surrounded by comparable things, so that it never gets the space to register as exceptional. The counterflex is not aggression. It is compression. It shrinks the room your success gets to occupy. The scorekeeping underneath this is more precise than most people realize. These are not people who vaguely track where they stand relative to you. They know. They remember the date you got the promotion, the number you mentioned, the timeline you laid out, not because they are invested in your success, because they are invested in the gap, specifically in whether it is widening or closing, and in which direction. The tell is what happens to their behavior, depending on where the scoreboard stands. When they are ahead, by their internal accounting, they are generous, easy, magnanimous. They can afford to be. The scoreboard is comfortable. When you close the gap, or when something shifts the comparison in your favor, the counter move appears. Fast, almost reflexive. Not because they consciously decided to respond that way, and this is the part that matters, but because the competitive architecture underneath the relationship runs that program automatically. This is what Machiavelli meant when he separated intention from pattern. You do not need someone to intend you harm for their behavior to consistently work against your interests. Pattern is what you respond to. Pattern is what you plan around. A person can be entirely unaware that they are scorekeeping, while the scoreboard governs every move they make. The covert rival is more expensive than the open one. With an open rival, you know the terrain. You can prepare. With the covert rival, you are managing two relationships simultaneously. The one on the surface, which requires warmth and normalcy, and the one underneath, which requires vigilance. That double processing is a tax on your energy that compounds quietly over time. Here is what changes when you finally see it clearly. You stop trying to explain the friction. You stop wondering why certain people respond to your wins with a particular energy, why good news seems to create distance instead of closeness with specific people, why you leave certain conversations feeling somehow smaller than when you entered them. You stop pathologizing your own perception. You just read what's in front of you. Most people who watch something like this walk away with a list. 8 things to look for. 8 reasons to be suspicious. 8 justifications for pulling back from everyone around them and calling it self-awareness. That is not what this is. Machiavelli was not a paranoid man. He was a precise one. The whole architecture of his thinking rests on a single discipline. See what is actually there, not what you wish were there, not what you fear might be there. What is there? The person who mistakes caution for wisdom ends up isolated and calls it protection. The person who mistakes accuracy for cynicism never builds anything real because they cannot tell the difference between the people who will hold when things get difficult and the people who will not. Here is what the 8 behaviors actually give you. Not a reason to distrust everyone. A way to stop trusting indiscriminately. There is a difference between those two things that most self-help content never bothers to draw. Indiscriminate trust is not warmth. It is laziness. It skips the work of actually reading who is in front of you and replaces it with optimism as a default setting. And optimism as a default setting, when the people around you include even 1 or 2 who operate the way this video describes, is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler who is deceived deserves to be. That sounds harsh until you understand what he meant. He was not saying the deceived person is morally culpable for being lied to. He was saying that the tools to see clearly are available, and choosing not to use them is itself a choice with consequences. The people who will genuinely hold for you, who will be present in the setback, and quiet during your success, and honest when the honest thing is hard to say, those people exist. They pass these tests, not because they know the tests exist, but because they are not running a hidden agenda that requires passing them. Genuine alliance does not need disguise. It just behaves consistently, whether you are watching or not. Whether you are ascending or struggling, whether you have something to offer or nothing at all. The number of those people in any given life is smaller than most people want to believe. That is not a tragedy. That is information. Because when you know who they are, you can stop distributing your trust across a wide field of uncertain returns and put it where it actually compounds. One question before you go. Of the 8 behaviors in this video, which one did you recognize immediately? Because a specific person came to mind the moment you heard it. That recognition is not paranoia. That is your pattern recognition, finally getting permission to tell you something it has been trying to say for a while. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, the next video goes further. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you made it this far, you already know you're not the person this content is wasted on.